Starting to let people in.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being on. Bienvenidas a todos, bienvenidos. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Por favor, mientras estamos empezando, si pueden poner su nombre en el chat, cuál organización están representando y en dónde en Pensilvania viven. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for hopping on and for being on time. Getting a great amount of folks already on. If you could just do us a favor, please start introducing yourself in the chat. You could put your name, which organization you're with today, and where in the state of Pennsylvania you're in. And also, if you want to, how you heard about today. I know there was a lot of outreach done by our organizations and also email blasts, so thank you, everyone. We'll get started in 3 more minutes, just waiting for folks to hop on. And interpretation will also be available. We'll go over that in just a couple minutes. Gracias a todos por los que apenas están entrando. Nosotros solo estamos poniendo la bienvenida. Si quieren, pueden poner cómo se sienten hoy con un emoji. Thanks everyone that's hopping on now. If you just hopped on, we're also putting our names and introducing ourselves in the chat. If you would like, you can feel free to show how you're feeling today with a quick emoji. We have a ton of different options. And just so we know, this meeting is going to be live streamed on Facebook. So we'll be getting started in just 2 minutes. Y solo para que todos sepan, vamos a estar grabando esto y estaría publicando en Facebook. Entonces, muchas gracias. Ya estamos mirando muchas cosas en el chat. Entonces, bienvenidos a todos. Sigan por favor poniendo sus nombres, sus ciudades y cómo se enteraron de hoy, con cuál organización están. Thanks, everyone. We're seeing a lot of activity in the chat already. So many participants. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on. Thanks, Barbara, Dottie, Jim, Ed and Kent, and Mark for already introducing yourself in the chat. Looking forward to hearing a lot from everyone else. We even have some Ohio folks. Oh, but you're in Philadelphia today, so welcome. Tenemos de Chambersburg, Lancaster, we have Lancaster folks, Chambersburg folks. We have activists in Pittsburgh looking to help, always help needed. We're definitely going to go over a couple of ways that you can get help, that you can help right away. So really looking forward to having everyone on. Please continue that activity in the chat. It's always lovely to hear a little bit of everyone. Sigan poniendo su nombre en el chat. Muchas gracias, Leo, por poner en el chat. Tenemos de Lancaster, York también. Oh, even Erie. I know it's sometimes tough to get all the way out there in Western PA. Huntingdon. Got so many orgs on already. Even Indiana. Awesome. All right. Well, it's 7:05, so I think we have a great amount of folks already almost 40 participants. So yay, and we have more coming on. Really exciting to be with you all today. So we're going to have Jasenia offer right now how to use interpretation. We do have some folks who are only Spanish speaking here. So if you are not bilingual, please make sure to also put that interpretation on. Muchas gracias a todos por estar. Ya casi tenemos ya tenemos a 40 personas, entonces definitivamente una reunión muy buena que vamos a tener con todos de todo el estado. Ya tenemos varios en el chat que están de varias partes del estado. Entonces se lo voy a pasar a Yesenia, que nos va a decir cómo empezar la interpretación.
Gracias, Julissa. Voy a hacer este anuncio primero en inglés y después en español. I'm gonna make the announcement first in English and then in Spanish. My name is Yesenia. I'll be the interpreter today. And because we will be having simultaneous interpretation, we ask all speakers to remember to speak slowly and clearly so that everyone can benefit from what's being said. Right after this announcement, we'll activate the Zoom interpretation feature. If you're using Zoom on your computer, you'll see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. You should click on that globe and then select your preferred language. If you're using Zoom on your phone, at the bottom of your screen, there'll be 3 little dots where it says more. You should click on that, then language interpretation, and select your preferred language. And if you have any problems doing this or during the event, with interpretation, please put a comment in the chat and someone will try to help you. Thank you. Mi nombre es Yesenia, yo voy a ser la intérprete hoy y como vamos a tener interpretación simultánea, le pedimos a todos los oradores de que hablen de manera lenta y clara. Al terminar este anuncio, vamos a activar la función de interpretación. Si está usando Zoom en su computadora, va a ver un icono de un mundo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Haga clic en el mundo y seleccione el lenguaje de su preferencia. Si está usando Zoom en su teléfono, haga clic en los 3 puntitos donde dice MORE, que significa más. Seleccione Language Interpretation, interpretación del lenguaje. Y luego escoja su lenguaje. Si tiene algún problema activando la interpretación o durante el evento, con la interpretación, ponga un comentario en el chat y alguien le tratará de ayudar. Gracias.
Thank you, Jasenia. So it's definitely throughout the presentation, any questions, definitely try to make sure everyone's speaking slow. So we'll give interpretation a minute to make sure it's on. Eric, just let us know when interpretation is good. There we go. Thank you everyone for your patience. Meanwhile, for folks who, sorry, Eric, just so can you make Jasenia the interpreter? Sorry. While we're waiting, folks, feel free to continue putting and introducing yourself in the chat. Para los que mientras estamos arreglando ahorita lo de la interpretación, por favor, asegúrense de poner como de su nombre en el chat.
Pongan un sí en el chat si me escuchan.
Is interpretation good?
We're good, I think.
Okay, great. All right, so before we get started, I just want to present myself. My name is Shalissa Morales. I'm with MILPA. It is the
Soy
movement
parte de MILPA, movimiento de líderes.
to be with everyone today. MILPA is a network of families across the state that fight for the human rights for all, regardless of their immigration their immigration status. We're a statewide organization and part of the Poor People's Campaign, which we will be learning a lot about today. So I'm going to pass it to Tammy, which is our co-presenter today.
Awesome. So we're ready to get started. Awesome. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name's Tammy Rojas. I'm actually with the organizations Put People First PA and the Pennsylvania and National Union of the Homeless, as well as recently stepped on as one of the new tri-chairs of the Pennsylvania People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. And I do some work with the Freedom Church of the Poor through the Cairo Center. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation today. Eric, if you could go ahead and put the slideshow up for us, that'd be great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, so thank you, for joining us today for this overview of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. The Poor People's Campaign is a national campaign, and there are state coordinating committees in almost all states, including here in Pennsylvania. Could you go to slide number 2, Eric, please? Our plight, fight, and insight. The campaign is committed to addressing 5 interlocking injustices: systemic poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, militarism, and a war economy, and a distorted moral narrative that helps keep these injustices in place. We say that we have to organize against all five, that they are all related. In the campaign, the people most affected by these injustices offer testimonies. It helps us put a face on what can sound abstract, and we call this sharing our plight, fight, and insight. Next slide. And here we're going to watch a video.
We must be honest about the foundations of the political and economic systems we call America. I love America because of her potential, but I know that America will never even get close to being a more perfect nation until we are honest about the politics of rejection.
I want to tell you about some of the leaders who are building the Poor People's Campaign. Callie Greer from Selma, Alabama, who had to bury her daughter, Venus, because she didn't have health care.
I'm here today to share my daughter Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast and she wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am a working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
I'm a second generation fast food worker and I've experienced the cycle of poverty firsthand. Growing up, I watched my mother endure long hours of back-breaking labor, doing everything she could to feed me and my sisters. My employer barely pays me enough to pay rent and utilities, let alone with the medical expenses with my mother.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. My only chance of going to college was joining the Army.
It was one thing to know that you didn't have water and you couldn't afford your water. It's a whole nother to find out that they shut off your entire community and none of you matter.
But when I lost my housing, healthcare, and income all at the same time, I was terrified, panicked.
Hi, my name is Pamela Rich. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on power. And I have to travel back and forth to Birmingham to take my daughter with the CPAP machine. Don't have a car and don't have no way to take her.
This is the largest encampment in Aberdeen. There's about 1,000 people in a town of 16,000 who are homeless.
In my community, we were all shut off in the day because none of us could afford our water bills. In the past, my family wasn't able to afford electricity in the winter. It was very hard on all of us.
This wall, this is sin of the highest order.
When there are 38 million poor children, when 60% of African Americans are poor, when 65% of Latinx are poor, when 40% of Asians are poor, when there are 67 million poor white people, we must say, this is not right.
Thank you, Eric. Wow, that was powerful. And as you saw, it did start out with words from Bishop William Barber and Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who are the co-chairs on the national level of the Poor People's Campaign. Now we're going to talk about the 5 interlocking injustices. So here are the 5 interlocking injustices we mentioned before the video again. So again, they are systemic racism, poverty and inequality, ecological devastation, war economy and militarism, and the distorted moral narrative. Could you go to the next slide? Now, let's go a little deeper into what we mean by a distorted moral narrative. The distorted moral narrative of white supremacist religious nationalism perverts and weaponizes morality against poor and marginalized people. The campaign calls people to a deeper and wider view of morality, in which the needs of the poorest receive priority, and not just in the form of charity, but in the form of changing the structures that keep people poor. For example, Reverend Barber and Reverend Theo Harris, with many other faith leaders, have repeatedly called out leaders of the so-called Christian right, saying that they misrepresent what the Hebrew prophets and Jesus stood for and taught. One fact they highlight is there are more than 2,000 verses in the Bible that speak of poverty and injustice and caring for the least of these. As Reverend Barber puts it, too many preachers say so much about what the Bible says so little, and so little about what the Bible says so much. Next slide, please. A distorted moral narrative blames poor people for their poverty. But our campaign holds that the existence of poverty in the richest country in the world is a sin. The sin is in the structures that keep people poor and exploited and unable to meet their basic needs. It's the structures we need to address. Also, while plenty of people say there isn't enough money to care for everyone or to change the way we are used to doing business, we reject that lie of scarcity. There is plenty of money and other resources to go around. The sin is that so much money and power are held by a tiny few at the very top. And now I think I pass it on to you, Jalissa.
Thank you. So now we're going to touch more on the question of why the Poor People's Campaign and why the National Call for More Revival. As you can imagine, this question comes up a lot, and today's Poor People's Campaign really recalls on what exactly Tammy was saying and Dr. Martin Luther King's initial Poor People's Campaign. So we'll hear a little bit about the history as well. Dr. Martin Luther King was working on this project when he was killed, and he was convinced that it was organized by people who could shift policies into this country, and so do all of us. That's what we believe and why we're here. And the National Campaign for More Revival became this core front for us, because these issues exactly that Tammy was mentioning, they are moral issues. We know that we have that on our side. We are on the correct moral side. Our campaign knows we have to revive a sense of genuine morality in our country to address those 5 interlocking justices that Tammy mentioned. All of those are moral issues, while some of them may want to restrict some other moral issues of who we love or any what can be considered controversial. We say that these 5 major injustices are what we really need to care about, and what we need to start moving towards and actually creating change into. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So we're going to compare a little bit about the previous Poor People's Campaign from 1968 and learn a little bit about the history and the roots of our Poor People's Campaign and see where we are now. we'll move on to the timeline of our 1968 Poor People's Campaign. And I apologize that some of the slides aren't going to be in Spanish, but the timeline is just for everyone to get a sense. So in the winter of 1968 was when Martin Luther King was embarking on this Poor People's Campaign, an initiative that would bring a multiracial coalition to the nation's capital to demand federal funding for full employment and a guaranteed annual income. There were anti-poverty programs and housing for the poor. And in March 1968, 50 organizations joined this force to plan the Poor People's Campaign in March. And then Martin Luther King was on the cusp of bringing 3,000 poor people. Sorry, I see someone has their hand up, and if it's about interpretation or anything, just wondering if you have any problems, feel free to put it on the chat, and we do have tech being able to help. And then we'll also have some time for reflection. Thank you, Mary. Excuse me, sorry, but sorry to go back into a little bit of what I was saying. Dr. Martin Luther King was on the cusp of bringing 3,000 poor people, which we have referred to as a nonviolent army and a freedom church of the poor, is what he called it, in Washington, D.C. King would have never made it to Washington, and never did make it to Washington, because he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. Leaders of the Poor People Campaign, of course, were devastated, and under this direction, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, he planned the march that took place on June 19th, which is always why we had that historic June, 18, 19, 20, try to commemorate during those dates. And at that time, in 1968, it was an estimated 50,000 participants. So as you can imagine, a huge mobilization, and people traveled all around the country in Conversion, Washington, and they called what we know as they built the Resurrection City, which we know was built on tents on wooden platforms, and then lived there for around a month. They used all the local services, and they demanded change from their legislators. They staked out for a month. The Poor People's Campaign fell short of its goal to win significant anti-poverty legislation. However, it marked a change on the civil rights movement from advocating to a platform of only racial equality to one that was incorporated to interracial class issues and an economic goal. So that mantle is what we use today, and that's what the Poor People's Campaign has been formed under. And it's this huge gap between the super haves and have-nots that has drastically widened. We see that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. If you could go to the next slide, Eric. And please, if you have any thoughts right now or any reflections, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll also be having some questions and answers, some time for reflection at the end. So I want to give the chance to someone to actually read this slide. Read these next two slides.
Evolution of King's version. From civil rights to human rights. 2, from racism to racism, poverty, and militarism. You want me to read Spanish, or do you want to get someone else?
That's okay. There's simultaneous interpretation, so they hear it. Thank you, Irving. Thank you for reading, but that's exactly right. So shortly before Martin Luther King's death, he began to move forward from what we see this shift from focusing only on civil rights to all human rights, and focusing from racism to what we then called what we're saying, that these 3 evil triplets, which is exactly what is on the screen. It's racism, poverty, and militarism. So what the current PPC campaign has done, they've taken these 3 evil triplets and added ecological devastation and a distorted moral narrative. So that's why we have those 5 evils that were mentioned in the beginning. I'm going to pause just because I see some things going on in the chat about interpretation. There is, if you are on your phone, I believe there is a little ball icon that you can use, or on the 3 dots. you can click more and there should be interpretation.
La interpretación.
I'm going to move on and please feel free to let us know in the chat if that was resolved. Great. We can go to the next slide, Eric. All right. And I know it's a little hard to read, but is someone able to read this next quote? Okay, I can read it, and then it's.
I'll read it, Lisa.
Okay. Sorry.
For we know now that it isn't enough to integrate lunch counters. What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., speaking at a rally to sanitation workers in Memphis on March 18th, 1968, 2 weeks before his death.
Thank you, Margaret. And as we can see, this is exactly the shift we were talking about. It wasn't just a racism issue. It's now, okay, we're at the counter, but I don't have enough money to buy a hamburger. I can't afford my basic necessities. So this is a prime example of how this shift was happening. And it started just 2 weeks before Martin Luther King's assassination. So now we're going to move on to where we are now, or where was the beginning of this new Poor People's Campaign that happened in 2018 between Kairos and the repairers of the breach. So we can see here, the Poor People's Campaign is now, as we know, it's a national call for more revival. It's rooted in these 10 years of organizing on the part of the Kairos Center, which was previously the Poverty Initiative, and then also the repairers of the breach, which grew out of these Moral Mondays that were held. So 50 years after these first gatherings of the original Poor People's Campaign, these two organizations came together and officially launched the Poor People Campaign, a national call for moral revival. It followed 10 years, let's mention, and then Kairos is being led in New York City by Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and repairers of the breach is in North Carolina, led by Reverend Dr. William Barber. We know our two leaders leading this campaign. So we'll move on to the lessons from the original campaign. So if there's a volunteer to read, they are also welcome to read. If not, that's okay. So we are going to look at exactly what was mentioned on the slide, lessons from the original campaign. The highlights have definitely been that we need many Martins. As we've seen, as scholars have studied the original 1968 campaign, and the biggest lesson was that we need many Martins. We can't do it with just one Martin Luther King. There's many leaders that have to be just brought up through the movement. Dr. Martin Luther King was a central figure, and then after he was killed, it was hard for the movement to continue without such a figurehead. And we cannot, as a movement, we cannot rely on one person, which is why we need to evolve many Martins. The Pennsylvania poor people then recognized that it needed long-term, deep relationships between leaders and organizations if we are to overcome this divide and conquer strategy, which is every single strategy from the higher ups. It's divide and conquer. That's exactly what they've been doing to our communities. So in order to combat that, just like we're saying, we need to create those long-term, deep relationships between leaders and organization. And then I'll pass it to Tammy to talk a little bit more about the poverty in America today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jalissa. Yeah, so now we're going to take a deeper look at what poverty looks like in America today. One of the key areas of our work. If you could go on to the next slide, Eric. Thank you. I know that's probably hard to read. So now there's in MLK's day, right? He talked about 40 million people who were poor. Now today there are more than 140 million poor and low wealth people. More than about 43% of our whole population. That's huge. In Pennsylvania, we see that 4.7 million residents, 30% of all Pennsylvanians are poor or low income. And this, breaks down demographically, which you can kind of see here on the slide. I don't know how well folks can see that, but it does kind of like break it down there, like, by race and things like that. So you can kind of see the breakdown of who's poor in the nation of Pennsylvania. Those numbers may sound surprising to some, because they are not the numbers we are used to hearing, right? It's not, our government isn't really honest about the state of poverty in our nation. The way poverty is measured is very outdated and doesn't take into account what it actually costs to live decently in this country. The campaign has partnered with the Institute for Policy Studies to understand poverty and come up with better ways to measure it and understand what keeps it in place. In this graphic, you can see that we cite percentages of different groups. We do this regularly. We show that huge numbers of people are poor of many groups, and that while people of color are disproportionately poor, in raw numbers, more white people are poor. We point this out to show how we have more in common with each other than popular media would portray. Statistics like this show our common interest, and that poverty is not just an issue for poor Black and brown people. We must unite and come together. Next slide, please. While our government continues to bail out our banks, like we saw most recently with Silicon Valley Bank, more and more is being taken away from the poor and working class. And then here, where it has post-pandemic, because the pandemic's winding down, right? These are the attacks that are happening currently on the working class and poor. I don't know if there's a volunteer that maybe wants to read the slide where it says poverty post-pandemic by chance.
I'll try it.
Okay.
Post-pandemic. Evictions moratorium canceled. SNAP expansion rolled back. 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 1.2 million people in PA, 18 million people nationwide will lose their access to affordable health care through Medicaid this spring. Rise in homelessness that we have not seen since the Great Depression. At the end of 2022, approximately 4.7 million households were behind in their mortgage payments. Meanwhile, by the end of 2022, billionaires and the super wealthy had added over 1.5 trillion to their wealth since the beginning of the pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you for reading that. That's just very, very powerful to kind of take in, right? And it really is a prime example to show that these issues are systemic, right? People in power literally create these problems. They create poverty and then turn around and criminalize us for our poverty. And as someone who's a part of an organization, for example, working on the Medicaid cutoffs, I can tell you that the majority of them are going to lose their Medicaid, not by any fault of their own. And that's what makes it even worse. All right. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jalissa. Are you there, Jalissa?
Oh, I apologize. I was on mute. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Tammy, for that. I was over here yelling my lungs out that we should fight the poverty and not the poor. The main takeaway I want all of us really to have is that everyone has a right to live. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Sorry. Thank you. All right, we can go to the next slide. I really want to bring across the point of fusion organizing. We really want to combat this strategy that our opponents really have of dividing and conquer. The main way we are going to do that is organizing across lines of difference. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The most effective way to respond is with fusion organizing. We need to draw together to understand our common needs and work for them. All of our injustices between poverty, racism, environmental destruction, militarism have this background of this distorted moral narrative. They're all interconnected and they're all related. All of our responses need to be integrated as well. We're stronger when we draw together across so many of these different lines. And just like those numbers that Tammy showed at the beginning, if all of us came together, if all 64 or if all of us came together across those lines of division, we would be very much more powerful. And it's really time to wake up that sleeping giant. So we'll go to the next slide. Because we know, we'll go to the next slide, that we as a movement, we will not win alone. We just can't. That's not what our movement is. And that's why our movement is building at this state level. We're also politically independent. We know that we cannot rely on anyone to be able to create a change unless we push them there. So we're politically independent and we are organizing in all of our four evils at once. We know that we can't settle for one or the other. It's our livelihood at stake. And just like we're mentioning, we're organizing across all of our differences. We know that we need to do that in order to create a much stronger and needed movement. So we'll go to the next slide. We want to invite all of you to formally join one of our organizations that are part of this Poor People campaign. So this Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign has a coordinating committee, which is led by these organizations that are on the screen. All of these are led by the poor and dispossessed and by these organizations that work for fairness, equality, and justice for all. And I just want to paraphrase really quickly Reverend Dr. William Barber, who says, we're not an organization, we're an organism. We know we can't survive without each other. Each of these member organizations that are on the screen right now, they work on various fronts of struggle. So for example, Put People First, which was represented by Tammy today, they primarily work on healthcare. MIPA works primarily on immigration. March on Harrisburg works primarily on democracy and corruption. And all of these organizations, as mentioned, they work on equality for the people, poor people and the working class. So we all work together to move these campaigns forward and not one step back. We know that we need to do that together. One of the best ways to get involved in the Poor People's Campaign, the Pennsylvania Poor People's, is to join one of these member organizations. And if you are part of organizations that you do not see on the screen here, and you believe that your organization is interested, please feel free to email, excuse me, we're gonna have our email posted in the chat as well. And in the next slide, let us know and we'll be happy to set up a call to do an introduction with you and discuss further details on joining the coordinating committee as well. So I'll pass it. Yep, and Eric just put it in the chat, our email, to feel free to get in touch with us. And I did see some individuals in the chat earlier who were looking to get involved. And I'm going to give it to Tammy for that next slide.
Awesome. Whoop, whoop. Whoop, whoop. Trying to get everyone excited here, right? So not only are the options available to join one of the organizations on the coordinating committee or have your organization join the coordinating committee, We have another great way to get involved, is to join one of the statewide Poor People's Campaign working groups. Did someone maybe want to read the slide real quick to kind of name off the different working groups we have here?
Hey, Tammy, it's Barbara. I can read it.
Cool.
Our work and how to get involved. Plug into one of our working groups. Action Logistics, Media and Communications, Faith Leaders, Outreach, Political Education, Arts and Culture, Fundraising, Underground Railroad.
Awesome. Thanks, Barbara. And yeah, I believe Eric did put it in the chat, but just to kind of say it again, that the email is pennsylvania@poorpeoplescampaign.org, which I believe is there also on the slide. Yeah, so now we're coming close to the end here. So again, just want to reiterate that the best ways to get involved is to either join a member organization or one of the working groups. And to close out the slideshow, we're going to have some final words here from William Barber. So we're going to watch another quick video, and then we're going to have some time for some reflections and like questions and stuff. So I guess the next slide with the video. Whoop, whoop.
Everybody has a right to live healthcare. Everybody don't stop.
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has come up with a series of demands. And I want you to say those demands after I say them.
I know that you are here for the same reasons we all are here. To put our elected official on notice. We demand an immediate restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We demand an end to racist gerrymandering. We demand a reversal of state laws that prevent municipalities from raising minimum wage. We demand a just immigration system. We demand a timely citizenship process that guarantees everyone the right to vote.
We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to privatization of military budget and any increase in military spending. We demand a ban on assault rifles and a ban on the easy access of firearms. We demand an end to federal programs that send military equipment into local and state communities. We demand that the call to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border be ceased.
We demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, and offshore drilling. We demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals.
We demand an immediate implementation of federal and state living wage laws. We demand the right for all workers to form and join unions. We demand equal pay for equal work. We demand a guaranteed annual income. We demand fully funded anti-poverty programs that protects the welfare of us all. We demand decent housing. We demand free tuition. We demand free tuition. We demand equity in education. We demand an end to the resegregation of schools. We demand equitable funding for historically black colleges and universities. We demand relief from crushing household, student, and consumer debt. We demand the repeal of the 2017 federal tax law. And we demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share. We believe that we can win. We believe that we can win. We believe that we can win. We believe that everybody has a right to live.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands. When we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life limited and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Woo, I don't know about y'all, but that video gets me every time. I love using it for Mystica. Gets me fired up. And it's just like such a fantastic like montage video that shows our power, strength, what our campaign is about. Whoo! Now, I did want to give a couple minutes in case folks did have immediate questions that they would like answered, before Margaret goes on to like next steps and we close out. But yeah, is there folks that have questions, maybe a reflection? Try to keep it brief if we can, so that we can make some time for a couple folks. And then again, please let us know if you want to get connected.
Tammy, what is meant by the Underground Railroad on the working group list?
Yeah, so that was kind of like, it was created, we kind of refer to it as the modern day Underground Railroad. And some of what I understand that the work that's been done so far with that is it's kind of helped with, I know it took on particular fights around folks that were separated from their children, like via like COS, things like that. And actually by going through and supporting folks, they were able to reunite those families. Whereas had they have been left alone to tackle the system by themselves, that may not have happened. And so that was some of the work that I've done, but I know it has a lot more potential. It's all a matter of, who we can kind of get on and pull together to really expand that work. But that was one of the areas of work that group did. Thanks, Sue.
Any reflections from folks? I see a lot of in the chat. Oh, it's very inspirational. Love to hear some folks' thoughts.
Hello? Anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I've been watching Dr. Barber for years, and I always wanted to do something with the Poor People's Campaign. And, I come from a background of teachers and educators, and I've seen a lot of things, and I'm also a behavior specialist, that have me understanding, and I've said this so many times, that it's not just a black, white thing, it's an all over thing. It's not just a rich, poor thing. It's a thing that needs to be fixed because we are all the same, absolutely all the same. We all have the same basic needs and dreams. And this campaign is absolutely where I need to be. And I thank you so much for allowing me to say that.
Awesome. Thank you for that reflection. Anybody else want to share anything? Maybe we could take another question or reflection or something before we move it on to Margaret to review next steps, and then we're going to close out.
About the only thing I wanted to say is that somehow, some way, we've got to stop building multi-billion-dollar weapons, and we need, basically, because we need more housing, more schools, and we need affordable health care. We need to take care of our people, take care of humanity here in the U.S. That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Irving. Yeah, that's, the military budget goes up every year. The last I remember hearing it was like 818 billion. And again, a large significant amount from when MLK talked about, I think, was it $40 billion or something, or 80 billion? I forget what it was, but now it's like 818 billion or something off the wall. So absolutely right. We live in a nation that is thriving on our war economy and mass incarceration, but yet we're closing hospitals and everything else when we desperately need these kind of facilities. Absolutely. Okay. So yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for coming. I'm going to pass it over to Margaret to review some next steps. And hopefully folks did put into the chat or did mark down the email address and website to get connected. So I'm going to pass it over to you now, Margaret.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Carroll, and I am one of the leaders of the outreach team. And I want to tell you something about some of the teams that we have. So you can join them. The first team I'm going to talk about is the Faith Leaders team. And what the Faith Leaders team does is study PPC material and sacred texts that are meaningful and motivated and have motivatable stuff to our members. I'm sorry. The Faith Leaders team supports clergy in justice work that they are doing. They politicize charity work into justice projects of survival. Faith Leaders teams organize and empower our congregations and create permanently organized communities. The Faith Leaders team learn about PAPPC member organizations and how to support their work and attach themselves to member organizations and to organization leaders. And the Faith Leaders team also sacrifice together, be moral leaders in the public square and at our temples. To join the Faith Leaders team, email michael@marchonharrisburg.org. I will be putting that into the chat right now. Okay, the next team that I will speak about is the communications and media teams. We need people on our media and communications teams to help produce a statewide newsletter. If you're interested in doing that, please. Creating and sharing on social media, writing press releases, coordinating letters to the editors campaign. That's something that we can do in our own communities. Shooting and editing photos and videos, amplifying the voices of impacted Pennsylvanians in order to change the distorted narratives around poverty in the state. This is what we can do. And if people are interested in that, as you can see, you can contact Eric at ericgj@paydaynet.org or Beth at mohpa.org. And the last group that I'll talk about is the one that I actually help with. And that's the outreach team. And I always ask people, do you have 2 hours available monthly? We're not talking about, a deep, a heavy commitment of time or anything, but there are things you can do, and it would help expand the work of PAPPC. And no, training is provided for every activity that we do. You will never be out there trying to do something and nobody has trained you, because that's why we want many Martins, and part of that is given training so that you know what to do and how to do it. Okay, so one of the things that's coming up, we have these monthly education little programs that are coming up. You can support them. So if you're interested in supporting these programs, this is the first thing. Our next program is May 1st, and we need your help on that. We do phone banking and text banking. We support rallies and lobbying. And if you belong to organizations, we encourage you to report back to them and help educate your organizations and families and friends on PPC and PAPPC. And one of the things that's going to be happening in the future, and I just put it down as a thing to think about, is consider joining Teens of Ford lobbying teams. Right now, we don't have as much information on that, but as soon as I get it, I will get it out. And if you're interested in joining the outreach team, it's mcarol54@gmail.com. That was all in the chat screen that I did. And I'll pass it back to Jalissa, and thank you all.
Great.
We need your help. And the only way that we can grow is with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone, for being on. And you know, exactly as Margaret said, I know you're all here because you're interested, but we need for everyone here to take that next step and help support this Pennsylvania Support People's campaign. So we have also upgraded. We now have a Pennsylvania Poor People campaign website as well, and a calendar for you there as well, if Eric can put it in the chat, so that way you can also keep up to date with all of our latest activities and when all of these monthly calls are going to be. As mentioned, the next one is going to be May 1st at the same time, 7 to 8, but there are other opportunities to get involved from here until that point. So want to direct everyone to that website. Eric just posted it, and it's also on Facebook. So please feel free to check that out. It's lovely, lots of lovely pictures and past events, and a lot taken from our national partners. So I again want to thank everyone for being on, taking the time. I want to thank Margaret for the announcements. Thank Eric for tech, and Tammy for co-presenting with me, and also our interpretation to Senya. Really want to take the time to appreciate everyone that is on a Monday night. I know Mondays can be hectic and it's after the weekend, but this is a really important cause, and we really know that the 5 evils is what we are battling against, in this division across lines is what we need to combat. This is exactly why we do this fusion organizing, in order to come together as a poor and working class. Thank you, everyone. We're going to end out on our chant, forward together.
one step back.
Not one step back.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not
one step
back.
back.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.